Hello everyone, welcome to this video entitled The Beginnings of Democracy, and we're going to be looking at how ancient history influenced America's founders. In this unit we're going to be studying the foundations, if you will, of American government. So we're looking at things that happened before the United States that influenced them. And nothing had a bigger influence on the United States government than the governments of ancient Greece and ancient Rome. So let's take a closer look at what those governments were like. So first of all, you may not know this, but today the United States has the longest lasting government in the world. Over 230 years. That's pretty crazy. All the other countries in the world, they have had a different government or something change dramatically about their governments since the United States started. But our government has proven that it works. Today, it works 100 years ago and it works 200 years ago. So there's something unique about American democracy that's made our country great that other countries haven't quite been able to copy or do as well as us. The governments of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, governments that existed thousands of years before the United States was even a thought, heavily influenced some of the thinking that went into the government of the United States. And then finally in this video we're going to learn about how the governments of ancient Greece and ancient Rome fell apart, because those mistakes also influenced the United States. And they're interesting to think about as well. So let's start with the Greeks. The Greeks had the first democracy in history, which is cool for them. Before the Greeks, everyone had kings or dictatorships of some kind, a small group of people in charge of everyone. But Athens in Greece did things differently. In 600 BC, they made what was called a direct democracy. The eligible voting citizens, they made all the laws. Kind of cool, right? So in a direct democracy, the voting citizens, they vote directly on laws. So if you want to ban stealing, all the people in the city-state of Athens would vote yes or no for this law. If it got yes, it would pass. A very simple system. However, there's a couple problems with this ancient Athens government. First of all, most people in Athens, they were not citizens. Only about 10% of the population could actually participate. Women, slaves, non-white people, non-property owners, they had no say. So we think about democracy, we think about everyone being involved. Well, in Athens, very few people were. Also, the voting population was widely swayed by writings and dramas or plays, things that would happen in popular culture. And that would sometimes make the outcome of votes not what you would expect. You can imagine that you had regular people with a big say in the government and they didn't really know much about what was best for the country. So you had non-experts making laws. And that was a problem for Greece, because sometimes the vote wasn't best for the country because they were swayed by the writings and dramas that were happening in ancient Greece. Now, the Greeks also found that as they got bigger, the direct democracy worked less well, because as you can imagine, if you have to vote on every single law and everyone in the country has to vote, it can be very, very time consuming and very inconsistent. So the Greek democracy eventually kind of broke down and fell apart, and direct democracy, we learned, does not work in a large group. It's too inconsistent, it's impractical, and because there's not professional lawmakers in charge of making the laws, and it's the people making the laws, it can be subject to emotional reactions. Okay, so fast forward to the Romans. About 100 years after the Greeks made their democracy, the Romans made a similar democracy. They had a tyrannical, crazy king who they brutally murdered and kicked him out of office, and they made this thing called a republic. And this is really important. The word republic and the term representative democracy is kind of the same thing. So you can use the word republic or representative democracy interchangeably. But this term, republic, is different from a direct democracy because the people don't vote on the laws themselves. Here's how a representative democracy works. You have the people, you have the laws, and then in the middle, you have the lawmakers who the people elect. So the people get their power because they get to vote for the lawmakers. But the lawmakers, they're the ones that vote on the laws. So it's like a middleman, if you will. And this system worked much better than a direct democracy because it was faster. Only the lawmaking people got to vote on the laws. They were professional lawmakers, that's what they did. So they were less subject to being swayed by the public. And this is a system that we have today. We have a representative democracy in the United States. The power still lies with the people because they can choose the people who go to office, but once they're in office, the people get to do, they make the laws. All right, so let's see how Rome falls apart, because we know it didn't last forever. The Roman Republic at its peak was the greatest civilization in history. It was massive, it was powerful. They just basically rolled over everybody else and conquered tons of territory. It was pretty awesome to be Rome. However, the Roman Republic eventually will fall apart because of greed and corruption. For a long time, the Republic was so good because the senators who were chosen to be lawmakers had great pride in their country, and they would oftentimes do what was best for their country over themselves. So they put the country first and themselves second. But eventually, corruption will spread. Senators start to become greedy, do things that was better for them over the country. Consuls, that were kind of like the president back then, they would change rules and they would get elected many, many times in a row. Eventually, Julius Caesar becomes consul for life. He makes himself the president forever, if you will. And that was against the law. And the senators, they got really mad as more and more corruption was spreading. They got very power hungry as well. They murdered Caesar. And then there was a big civil war. And the Roman Republic fell apart. And an emperor took over, which is kind of like a king. And Rome was ruled by an emperor for the rest of the civilization's life, which was about another 800 years or so. So, let's conclude this video. The big learning things that we talked about here. Prior to the United States, other nations had democracies that we learned from, most notably Greece and Rome. The governments of Greece and Rome had unique structures. Greece had a direct democracy. Rome had a representative democracy that were different from each other. They both had its pros and cons. We learned from the pros and cons of those governments. Both Greece and Rome fell apart. And for a long time, there was no democracy in the world. For about 1,000 or so years, no democracy. Founders of the United States learned from these mistakes when creating our government today. So there's a little quick sneak peek back into the governments of Greece and Rome and how democracy used to work. We'll study it more in our group project that's coming up next. Talk to you guys later.